Canada and the US have long shared a tight energy trade relationship, but that's now under threat. After Trump imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian imports, Ontario Premier Doug Ford fired back, threatening to cut off electricity exports entirely. Since Canada supplies a major chunk of America's energy, this could ignite a serious trade war. What would a Canadian energy cutoff mean for American consumers? And could this push both nations to the brink? Let's break down the 7 key consequences of this brewing showdown. Number 7. Ontario's 25% electricity tariff, the first blow. Ontario's 25% tariff on electricity exports to the US was a direct response to Trump's trade war. On March 2, 2025, Premier Doug Ford announced that Ontario would impose an additional 25% charge on all electricity sales to key states like Minnesota, New York, and Michigan. Ford made it clear, "If the United States escalates, I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely." Ontario supplies around 65 terawatt-hours of electricity to the US annually. The 25% tariff could increase the average American electricity bill by about 100 Canadian dollars, $69 per month, and generate up to 400,000 Canadian dollars, $277,000 daily for Ontario. But it's not just about revenue, it's political leverage. Ford's government hopes to pressure Trump into reversing tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and dairy. If Trump stands firm, Ontario might cut exports altogether, leaving American states scrambling for power. But the fallout doesn't stop there. The impact on the US energy grid could be even more damaging. Number 6. The ripple effect on US energy markets. The US electricity grid depends heavily on Canadian imports, especially in northern states. In 2023, Canada supplied about 85% of all US electricity imports, mostly from hydroelectric plants in Ontario and Quebec. States like New York and Vermont are particularly exposed. New York's agreement with Quebec covers 25% of its annual energy needs through 2030. If Ontario cuts exports, New York could face power shortages and rising electricity costs. Michigan and Minnesota also rely on Ontario's cheap hydroelectric power to balance their grids during peak demand. Losing this supply would force American utilities to switch to more expensive and less sustainable sources, raising costs for both businesses and consumers. Analysts warn that even a partial reduction in Canadian electricity exports could trigger a domino effect, disrupting regional markets and pushing prices higher across the Midwest and Northeast. And Trump isn't one to let that slide without striking back. Number 5. Trump's retaliation, the risk of escalation. Trump isn't one to back down. On March 3, 2025, the White House issued a sharp response to Ontario's tariff. The United States will not be intimidated. These tariffs were imposed for national security reasons, and we will respond to any retaliatory measures. Trump's team warned that reciprocal tariffs could target Canadian energy, agricultural products, and auto exports. He also threatened to revoke the 1-month exemption on auto tariffs, which would impose an immediate 25% duty on Canadian-made vehicles and parts. Canada's auto sector is vital to its economy, with Ford, GM, and Stellantis operating major plants in Ontario. A 25% tariff could devastate Canadian auto exports and push car prices higher in the US. This tit-for-tat escalation could spiral into a full-blown trade war, hurting both economies and straining US-Canada relations even further. And if Trump doubles down, Canada's economy could take a serious hit. Before we delve deeper, do us a favor and smash that like and subscribe button. This helps us reach more auto enthusiasts just like you. Now, let's shift gears and steer towards our next point. Number 4. The economic fallout in Canada. Premier Ford's tough stance may target Trump's tariffs, but cutting off energy exports would also hit Canada's economy hard. In 2023, Canadian electricity exports to the US were worth about 2.3 billion Canadian dollars, $1.7 billion. Losing this revenue could strain provincial budgets and increase energy costs for Canadian consumers. Quebec, which supplies much of New England's electricity, is also considering similar measures. If both Ontario and Quebec limit exports, the total value of lost trade could exceed 5 billion Canadian dollars annually. The fallout could extend to infrastructure. Hydroelectric plants in Quebec and Ontario rely on export revenues for maintenance and expansion. Without U.S. customers, key infrastructure projects could be delayed or shelved, weakening Canada's ability to meet its own energy demands and leaving its grid more vulnerable. And it's not just electricity. Other key exports could soon be caught in the crossfire. Number 3. Supply chain disruption, more than just electricity. Electricity isn't the only export at stake. Premier Ford warned that if Trump's tariffs remain, Canada could restrict other key resources like steel, aluminum, nickel, and crude oil. Canada supplies over 60% of U.S. crude oil imports, about 1.4 million barrels per day in 2023. Cutting back on oil shipments could push up gasoline and diesel prices, especially in the Midwest. Steel and aluminum exports are also vulnerable. American automakers and construction firms rely on Canadian materials to keep costs down. If those supplies are restricted, production costs would rise, leading to delays and shrinking profit margins for U.S. companies. A disruption in these key supply chains wouldn't just affect energy. It could drive up costs for businesses and consumers, putting pressure on the broader U.S. economy. But the political fallout might be even more damaging. Number 2, political fallout. Fractures in the U.S.-Canada alliance. The U.S.-Canada energy partnership has been a pillar of North American diplomacy for decades, but Trump's aggressive trade policies are rapidly eroding that foundation. Political analysts warn that if Trump's tariffs stay, Canada could shift its trade focus toward Europe and China, reducing its dependence on the U.S. Premier Doug Ford has already hinted at this shift. We are not without options. If the U.S. continues down this path, we will explore new markets and new partnerships. Losing Canada as a strategic trade partner would weaken the North American energy grid and reduce the U.S.'s geopolitical influence. A realignment toward Europe and China would not only isolate the U.S. economically, but also disrupt the balance of power in the global energy market, leaving Washington with fewer bargaining chips on the world stage. And at the center of it all are ordinary American consumers. Number 1. The human impact, higher costs, and power shortages. At the heart of this political and economic standoff are ordinary American families. If Canada follows through on its threat to cut off electricity exports, the impact on American consumers could be brutal. States like Maine, Vermont, and Michigan, which rely heavily on Canadian hydroelectric power, could see electricity costs jump by as much as 20% within months. In rural areas, where energy infrastructure is already fragile, power outages could become more frequent, especially during extreme winter and summer months. Businesses aren't immune either. Higher electricity costs would push operating expenses up, forcing companies to either absorb the costs or pass them on to consumers. Ford's hardline stance might make sense as a bargaining chip, but at the end of the day, it's American households and businesses that could feel the heat. The final verdict: will the lights go out? Canada's threat to cut off electricity exports isn't just political theater, it's a legitimate economic weapon. Ontario's 25% tariff is already driving up costs for American consumers and businesses. If Trump retaliates with more tariffs, Canada could escalate even further, potentially leading to a full-blown trade war that neither side can afford. The bigger question is whether cooler heads will prevail. Can Trump back down without appearing weak? Can Canada afford to lose billions in energy revenue? Or are both sides locked into a high-stakes game of chicken, destined to drive this trade conflict to the brink? So what do you think? Will this energy standoff lead to a devastating trade war? Or will political leaders find common ground before the lights go out? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss the latest updates from Piston Pundit. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.